This week on Quadriga, Germany goes to war. At what price? After last month's terror attacks on Paris, Chancellor Angela Merkel promised France Germany's backing. Now it's time to turn words into deeds. Germany is set to commit Tornado reconnaissance jets to an anti-IS alliance. And the Bundeswehr will be helping to ease the burden on the French military in Mali. But in the German parliament, the Bundestag, there's opposition. Critics say there's no exit strategy. Can IS be eradicated by military might, or is Germany being sucked into another ill-advised military adventure? Coming to you from Berlin, Quadriga, the international debate. Your host this week, Melinda Crane.
Hello and welcome to Quadriga. The military mission looks set to be approved, but does Germany have a clear strategy? That's what we want to talk about today with three people who are following the debate very closely. It's a pleasure to welcome Ulrike Guiraud. She's a political analyst and founder and director of the European Democracy Lab. She says one mustn't confuse fighting terror with war. What France hopes to achieve with its military alliance is questionable. Equally questionable whether there's a clear strategy and what it means for French-German relations. Alan Posner, welcome back to the program once again. He's a seasoned political journalist for the Berlin newspaper Die Welt, and he says Germany has no choice but to back France. The alternative would be the collapse of the European Union. And finally, Friedrich Thelen is with us today. He worked for over 30 years for the business newspaper Wirtschaftswoche as bureau chief both in Bonn and in Berlin. Today he runs his own consulting company. He says, we have entered into this military mission very hastily. If you decide to intervene in a military conflict, you should always have an exit strategy. So welcome to all of you. Alan Posner, you say Germany has no choice. But is the German contribution to the air strikes against IS really going to make any difference? American warplanes have already been doing reconnaissance. Drones are also in action. What do the reconnaissance tornadoes of the Germans really add?
They don't add up to much, nor does the frigate, which is patrolling in the Eastern Mediterranean. Don't forget, we had an operation there in the Eastern Mediterranean to stop Hezbollah getting weapons, and Hezbollah now has more rockets than ever before. So the success of this is moot, to say the least. This is a political gesture. The French wanted European solidarity, and it was up to Germany to step forward and give it them. The British, obviously, are doing much more. Their first strikes against Syria already this morning. But within its limits, Germany is proving itself to be a good ally. That's basically the measure of it.
Ulrike Guiraud, how legitimate is that objective? One member of the German governing coalition, the parliamentary leader for the Christian Social Union, said this week, this isn't a war mission. It's a sign of solidarity with France. Is that a real strategy?
Well, and then a strategy to do what? I mean, if it's a strategy to fight the IS with military means, we can question this. I would make the argument, or would like to make the argument, that the real danger, what we are really overlooking these days, is the Front National in France. So, if this is the real danger, and if the question is how Germany can be solidarian with its most important partner country, then the question is whether the current strategy, which is military engagement, is fueling or not fueling the Front National. My argument here is that what we do will fuel Marine Le Pen for a couple of reasons. One is we do a coalition building, military coalition with Putin, who is financing Marine Le Pen. Second, if we go with Assad, Assad is responsible for bombing Syria, is responsible for the refugees, so is responsible for the hatred against the refugees in our country, Germany, and in France. And we perhaps do this alliance building also with Saudi Arabia, who is financing, the country is financing the banlieues of France, where the radicalization is growing. So we do three wrong things to fight the real problem of France, which is the Front National.
Friedrich Thelen, a letter from the German Foreign and Defense Ministries said that the deployment is aimed at preventing terrorist acts by IS. In other words, directly addressing the aftermath of the attacks in Paris. But do you think this military mission will really do that, or might it actually make terrorist attacks more likely?
I think it's a very courageous sentence to say that is going preventing terrorist attacks here. Well, my idea about all things, we are getting into a war and we don't know where it ends. For those who are not so familiar with military strategy, if you send Recon and you need fighting pilots around to protect them against any attack from the other side, then you need helicopter crews to get, if a plane is shot down, you must get the crews out. That's the beginning. And everyone who knows the area says there is no way to get rid of IS without normal troops. Well, I don't know, the governing units in this country know what that means. If the first bodies come here and then there are more bodies being sent there in a war where everyone is everyone else's enemy. I mean, they're shooting each other. Nobody knows that, and we don't have. That is the worst. We don't have an exit strategy. We don't know what sort of aim we want. Do we want a reorganized Near East with a new piquant line like after 1919 Versailles and the following conferences, splitting up the Near East? We have no idea. Do the Kurds get their homeland with parts of Turkey? Well, that is what the President Erdogan, by all means, doesn't want at all. So what do we want?
In other words, do I understand all three of you to be in consensus on the fact that this military mission is not going to achieve any real goals in terms of defeating IS?
No. I mean, I'm just saying that the German part of this mission is relatively subdued, relatively minor. I think stepping up the military attacks, as Britain is doing, as France has done, the United States is doing, and we must get the Saudis and the Gulf states and Erdogan to really cooperate on this and not go along with Assad and his Russian backers. If we can do that, if we can... See, the point is that wherever the caliphate comes, IS, they write on the walls, we are here and we are getting bigger. And we have to disprove that, because that's their main propaganda. And if we can do that, and then we're one step towards where we want to go to. It's just a small step, but it's a necessary step.
Ulrike Guiraud, you say we need to start at home. I take the point. Do we not need to do anything abroad against IS?
No, I have been saying this. I mean, I'm also not against a military mission at all price, but if we do that, we should be serious. I mean, there's a huge debate about ground troops. If we can build, I mean, if the aim of Hollande is to set a clear European example that united we stand, that we want to build a European defense alliance, and we could do this with the US, which is our main Western partners, and then we pretend to be the super sort of West with whatever military means, then we should be able to go against 30,000 people of troops, which is the IS. But then we should be serious. Just this sort of diffusive strategy that we fly some drones, which are, will also kill people there and will probably go into a spiral of violence, because the more we fly unpersonal drones over Syria and then we get the bombs in Europe, I think it's not a clear strategy, let alone that we don't have a strategy with whom we go, because, as I said, what we do not do is that we link everything that is happening there back to what is happening here. What is happening, and that is as much important. What is happening here is the complete erosion of the party systems in Europe. We have the Poles.
I'm going to stop you right there. I'm going to stop you right there. As I say, I want to come back to the question of who our bedfellows might be in this military mission. But one more word on the question of strategy, Friedrich Thelen. Germany's Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier insisted during a very heated parliamentary debate this week that the military mission is very firmly embedded in a larger overall political strategy to find a solution for Syria. And he pointed, of course, to the multi-party meetings in Vienna that have been going on. Are they not at least a step in the right direction, and significantly more than anything we've seen in the last few years?
Agreed. That's okay. If they really get forward, okay, but it's a very difficult task to get the Erdogans, the IS people, and the Saudi Arabian, everyone in there. Why don't we start with something else? All the money which is going to fly in there, it doesn't come from oil being got out of in Syria and sold to the Turks. Rubbish. What is important is the part of the Saudi Arabian royal family and the other royal or whatever families around the Gulf. Stay supporting with hundreds of millions these troops. Otherwise, the IS would not be operable. Well, if a very simple, if you have $10,000 and want to send them around the world, and to someone who you don't want, international authorities, not only NSA, everyone, even the banks can fight. There is no way you can transfer money without having been seen. So how does the money get there? Why don't the Americans not use their influence to stop it, dry it out?
Certainly, support from the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia is one source, but the New York Times reported this week that actually the main part of the income that IS is receiving is from so-called taxes that it imposes within its territory, which makes military experts say rolling IS back on the ground is crucial. The question is, will this military mission accomplish that?
Well, it can, because if you degrade them enough. Well, for instance, we're hitting their oil transporters very hard now, which is a very good thing. Totally agree we have to hit their money flow. Totally, and we have fighters. There are fighters in Iraq. There are fighters, Kurdish fighters, who can fight IS. There are fighters within Syria who can fight IS. So, yes, we can defeat IS, and then we have a foothold on the ground when it comes to the negotiations on the basis of the Vienna Agreement. So we need to be there. We need to have a presence beyond that of Assad and the Russians, because that's and Hezbollah.
Our presence, that's my key point. We should do military engagement, but not with the wrong partners, because the wrong partners influence our situation here in a politically so devastating way that we have populist problems here which are eroding our capacity to do that war. That's the connection.
So let's take a closer look at those partners. Critics of the military mission say that it makes Germany part of a rather motley crew. Definitely, the interests and the goals of the various parties waging war in Syria are diverse. Let's take a look.
In the war against IS, the aims of some of Germany's partners are dubious, like Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He's more an enemy of the Kurds than Islamic State. That's why Turkish forces are going after Kurdish positions in Syria and Iraq as much as possible. And Vladimir Putin is currently being courted by France in particular. Along with IS militants, Russian warplanes are hitting moderate rebel and Turkmen strongpoints along Syria's border with Turkey. He views almost every participant in the Syria conflict as a terrorist, except dictator Bashar al-Assad, who's terrorizing his own people with barrel bombs. But faced with IS terror, some Western politicians are beginning to view Assad and his army as the lesser of two evils. And even if he receives no direct cooperation, he'll profit from the fact that his enemies are all embroiled in other fights.
Friedrich Thelen, the French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius speculated last week that it might be possible to work with some of Assad's troops to fight against IS. And interestingly enough, German Defense Minister Ursula von der Leyen made a similar statement earlier this week before retracting it some days later. Are we seeing the first moves toward rehabilitating Mr. Assad?
Well, it looks like it. Apart from the fact that I don't think the German Minister of Defense is so much in the topic. She acquired the job. I don't know whether she knows enough about strategy and the rest, but she must have generals telling her those things. I think it's a dangerous because at the moment we unite ourselves with Assad, you'd automatically have new enemies. The whole pudding comes up. It's like putting your hand into a viper's nest. Everyone at the end, even you want to protect one, is going to bite you. There's a very good example to that. I suppose every one of you, and most of our viewers, have read Rudyard Kipling. There's a wonderful book about one came through to Peshawar. That was the one British soldier from an invasion into Afghanistan who came out of it. We don't want this to happen in Saudi Arabia. I don't think that troops will go out, but getting into conflict without having a clear strategy to get out, that you could read from Clausewitz to anyone else writing about military strategy.
Ulrike Guiraud, you were making this point earlier, saying cooperating with some of these partners might prove quite counterproductive in the long run. But many people would say it's just a necessary dose of realpolitik. We have to work with what we have to defeat this terrible group, ISIS.
doing the wrong thing is never good, and it always fights back, and it will fight back, and it fights back where you don't expect it. That's all I'm saying. The thing is that we don't link back to what is happening here, and what is happening here is the complete erosion of political party systems in many European countries, in Poland, in France. We have a true populist threat. The populist threat and it's devastating for democracy in Europe. This threat comes from refugees. The refugees come from Assad bombing Syria. So why should we cooperate with Assad? Why should we cooperate with Putin, who is first annexing the Crimea, but second financing Front National? And I said it, why should we? Saudi Arabia is promoting and fueling the radicalization of the banlieues, where the people who were doing these bombings in Paris were growing. So I think we just need to couple back to what is happening in the ground to what is happening here. And what we are seeing is that we may lose the capacities for a devastating momentum in our countries to go to war and to be capable to act. I mean, there is a connection.
But if I can just follow up. So you say a military mission might be necessary. Whom should we work with then?
Well, we have. If we are the West, and if we are strong, and if we have convictions, and if we have a goal, and if we have a strategy, then we map this out. We collect our means. We do a proper legal basis, and then we go. I mean, that would be a strategy in the sense that Friedrich Thelen just said it. This is what Clausewitz and all the other big people would have been doing: is get your target clear, get the operations, and then do it. But, this muddling through, and we now must go into bed with the wrong people because then we can't think. And then also we do not know what do we want to see? Do we want to see a Kurdish state? Is this our goal? Do we know that with this we go knocking against Erdogan's wishes? But Erdogan, we need him now for the refugees. I mean, it just does not make sense. And the clearer we are, I think the clearer we could work on a strategy.
Basically, you're right. I mean, in an ideal world, that's what we'd do. In an ideal world, we'd go in with troops, the flags flying, we'd occupy the territory occupied but now by IS, and then we'd negotiate with the rest from a position of strength. That would be 19th century gunboat diplomacy, and I'm all for it. I just don't think it's going to happen now. So then we do the second best thing.
Me neither.
And since we're talking about the Front National and Marine Le Pen and the erosion of the party system in Europe, you're totally right. We must not work together with people who want to destroy Europe, which is Mr. Putin and his ally, Mr. Assad. We must not do that under no circumstances. But at the same time, we must be seen to be strong against the people who've attacked us in Paris. There's no other way Mr. Hollande can defeat Mrs. Le Pen unless he's seen to be strong. So we do this. And
I agree.
Yes, what's going to happen? There's going to be mission creep. We're going to have planes shot down. We're going to have to go in there and then we're going to find ourselves the troops in there. And then we're going to have a situation like in Bosnia and so on and so on. But finally in Bosnia, we got it right. Took some time, but we got it right. That's what I'm hoping for. Right?
Yes, I can follow you, but Bosnia is a very limited area, with not such a lot of players. Here we have, as you said, Assad, the princes from Saudi Arabia. By the way, in the background we have Tehran, with a lot of interest in the game.
On the battleground.
Yeah, true. Yeah. This is a sort of strategy power game in an area. And the weakest front of them all is here, not for the reason that Putin buys up parties. That I don't share that much, but for the support this government will going to have. If the bodies come up, and they will shown here, then the last 50 years of pacifism, which is in this country, after 250 years of being belligerent, now the Germans teach the world how peace has to look like. Governments here will lose support in the country.
I'd like to take a closer look at what has often been called that German culture of restraint. Since last year, as all of you know, members of the governing coalition here in Germany have been pushing for Germany to take greater responsibility on the world stage, saying that inaction is often more problematic than action. What that means for defense strategy, however, remains a hotly contested topic in this country that indeed, for years, has cultivated a culture of military restraint.
2 world wars turned most Germans into confirmed pacifists, with the help of an American re-education program after the Third Reich fell in 1945. Post-war attitudes were shaped by one overwhelming imperative and political consensus: Germany must never again be allowed to instigate a war. Even the founding of a new military force, the Bundeswehr, was highly controversial. A peace movement took root across all sectors of society. Protesters demonstrated against any move that hinted at further remilitarization, like the stationing of NATO missiles on German soil. The majority of Germans were also against the Bundeswehr's first military missions abroad, in the Balkans and later Afghanistan. But polls now show that 45% of Germans favour committing Bundeswehr forces to the fight against IS. Just 39% are against, despite fears the commitment could provoke terrorist attacks. Are the pacifist Germans turning back into proponents of war?
Ulrike Gero, even years after sending forces to Afghanistan, the German government avoided the word war because it didn't want to alienate public opinion. What accounts for the difference in public opinion now? We heard there 45% of Germans saying they would support a military mission against IS. Why the difference?
Well, I mean, we have this discussion now for 20 years. We have been struggling with the first sort of AWACS Bosnia war and so, but this country is in a way getting adult, if I may say it that way, because we unified 20 years ago. We are also called for responsibility. There was a huge discussion about German leadership in Europe, and that discussion basically is that sentiment that Germany cannot be that little island like Switzerland and not being engaged in the world. I think it becomes pretty clear to all Germans now with the refugees on the front door that we cannot cut from the world, that we are in the danger of the world. We need to fix the problem, or to not fix, but be co-responsible for a world. And I think this triples now into the German mindset, and that's probably part of the explanation that we are more able to lead these discussions.
Alan Posner, the question is how robust that public support is. Our title asked the question, we posed, asked the question, what price the public might be willing to pay. Let's say a terrorist attack were to occur on German territory. Do you think that would tip public sentiment against a military involvement?
No, I doubt it. I think probably it would tip public opinion in favour of hitting back at the people who did it, which is why I think IS won't do that, unless they really want to have us in there. But no, I think, you know, when body bags come home, when the pilot is grilled alive, like the poor Jordanian pilot is by IS, it's a question, will we then want to get the people the way the Jordanians want to, or will we then say we've had enough? It's just too early to say, but I would think that we're finally, as Ulrike said, we realise we've stayed out of this conflict since it began in 2011, and look what it's brought us. It brought us 1 million refugees. So maybe we can try the other tack.
Yep. But not only 9/11 brought the refugees here. This is one of the nicest sponsored or whatever country with such a lot of riches. So anyone else, if we opened borders, people could do come here even if there is no war at home. Look at Libya. Was it a good idea that we didn't participate on getting Gaddafi down? I know a lot of leaders of today said, thanks heaven if we still had him there to keep the door from Libya closed. That
but this is cynical.
Yeah, sure. Politics is cynical.
It is cynical.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But then if you define
if I can just come back to our title, because we would like to see if we can answer that question. What price might be the one that the German public would then say, this price is too high? Military experts, for example, are saying that this mission could last as long as 10 years if it's really about routing IS. Is that something the German public, you think, would be willing to be in for the long haul?
If it's only 6 or 7 or 10 whatever fighters or reckons doing a mission there, and not many people dying, so they will see it's like a UN mission. But as anyone said, without ground troops, there is no chance to pacify the conflict. There will be the demand that Germany has been asked here, as a European Western ally, has to show its reality to the alliance and send troops there too. And that is a moment when, in German public, political parties lose the support.
A serious possibility, do you think, Ulrike Gero, that Germany would be asked to send ground troops to fight against IS in Iraq and Syria?
I wouldn't exclude that the question will come and that this country will to discuss which answers we give in the future. Yeah.
And is it a price the Germans would now?
I'm not reasoning in prices. I think it's a wrong tack. I mean, if the discourse is about defending our values have a price, yeah? And the values is not only defending security. This is the wrong discourse. But what we do is we defend our security. But if we want to defend values, it will have a price.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for being on the show, and thanks to you out there for tuning in. See you soon.